Alrighty, thank you everyone for heading in. We appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and get started with our last panel. I hope you've enjoyed our first three. I mean, we've had a fantastic group of speakers touching on a range of topics. Of course, the role of sports, that it brings to our country and around the world. So we're looking forward to this final panel, Sports as a Foreign Policy Tool. So happy to introduce our panelists here. Moderating today, we have Joon, who is a former ESPN Around the Horn participant and former ESPN, Washington Post, and Bleacher Report, staff writer. Dr. Lindsay Krasnoff, who is a renowned sports diplomacy expert and author. You might have seen her on television commenting on the Paris Olympics recently. As well as we have Jonatan, the head coach of the Washington Spirit, former head coach of Barcelona, and a two-time Champions League winner. And then we also have Travis Murphy again, CEO and founder of Jetr Global Sports Entertainment. If you don't mind welcoming them to the stage, thank you.
Unpause on the bottom.
Now, perfect.
There we go. Okay.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hello. Thank you all for participating in this panel today. I'm very excited for this conversation. I guess to start off, I think sports, there's been so much conversation over the course of the last decade especially about sports and politics and the idea that athletes should shut up and dribble and all that stuff. And so I think that it's good to take a step back and kind of see the role that sports has already played in politics in our history and our culture. I guess, Lindsay, to start off, I'm curious from your perspective as an expert on this, how has sports played a role in already shaping our politics and diplomacy over the course of our history?
Sports has always been political in some way, shape, or form since its very invention in the modern era and its use in the international arena. And so currently, while some might say we're in a very politicized time within sports, I would push back against that. There's always been different politicized eras, particularly during the Cold War, which might sound like it was ancient history to many people here, but still very much shapes our world. But that's where we kind of had this crystallization of sports in the use of international affairs and diplomacy in, I think, a way that has since shaped the evolution of the field. Sports diplomacy, writ large, is when there is communication, representation, and negotiation through cultural technical knowledge exchanges. And this happens, yes, at a government-to-government level or through government-led initiatives, but it also happens every single day within the professional sports, the collegiate sports, the amateur sports world, where today we're all internet connected and there's a lot of international labor migration within sports.
Travis, I'm curious from your vantage point how you have seen, especially running a firm like Jetr, how these dynamics are now coming to the front seat, and we're seeing, politics becoming tied together with the business interests, and as all these leagues are trying to go global in some capacity, how you've seen these dynamics come together, especially given your experience at the NBA and the NBA being at the forefront of expanding globally on an American sports league front, what you've seen in terms of how the dynamic and the relationship between sports and diplomacy has evolved, both from the league side and now being outside and being kind of a facilitator of that.
Yeah, I think, when you think back to, so the NBA, it really, as you said, was kind of at the forefront. So in 1989, the Atlanta Hawks did a tour of the then Soviet Union. They played exhibition games against teams in Russia, and it was literally on that trip, Ted Turner took the team to Russia. After the Goodwill Games, he saw an opportunity there, and David Stern, then NBA commissioner, went with the team and saw the fans that came out to Lithuania, to Georgia, and to Moscow, to the games, and it was that light bulb moment. And it was at that point that he started working with the FIBA president about getting potentially NBA players into the Olympics. And then 1992 in the Barcelona Olympics was the dream team. And that really was the moment. That was where it really springboarded American sports into the global focus. I think that the evolution, to your point, it's been, from the diplomatic perspective, I think teams traveling and leagues engaging overseas was seen more as, it was kind of dipping their toes in the water, like this would be a way to build goodwill, potentially build larger fan bases and some interest. Maybe they'll travel to the United States for some games. But now what we're seeing is this transition taking place where teams are very much investment properties, and they see these, as globalization continues to progress, these markets provide real opportunities for team ownership and league owners. And so, as Brendan at the NFL talked about earlier today, I mean, they really see the opportunity to engage young people, to engage future fans, but then also to expand into these markets as it becomes a viable business for the sports leagues. And so I don't think that's going to change. And how that affects diplomacy, it's that intersection of capitalism and business and diplomacy. And so I don't know if it's going to be more kind of a westernized system that starts to develop in this space, but certainly possible if it's American sports that are really pushing and driving this.
Jonatan, as the only non-American on this panel, I'm curious from your vantage point, soccer has always been this global sport. I'm curious how you saw that growing up, the global nature of soccer, but also how American sports, the impact of it internationally from your childhood, I guess, growing up. What you knew about American sports and how you've seen that change from people back home.
First of all, hi everyone, and thank you for the invitation to the Spanish Embassy. Look, for me, it's been challenging because when I arrived here to Washington and has the opportunity to coach American players, you can think something before coming here about what you expect in terms of training, but once you arrive here, you can say exactly how they are, how they breathe, how they smell. And for me, it's in terms of physical condition, I think because of college here is highly important, in terms of preparation, education, and try to be competitive in your sports. I think Spain is just, we can practice different sports, but football is like a religion. So for me, when you are developing players or athletes, here in America, they are top. And you can see what, because in the way that they train, especially in college, in the way that the cartridge of the player that they are capable to play different sports. So when you are young, have this type of environment to grow doing different things, give you a good opportunity, an amazing base as an athlete. If you compare with Spain, just in football, just starting when they are young kids, they are more specific on that. But in general, if we can speak about the main change as an athlete here in America and USA, is an example about the young players, the young athletes, how they can improve, how they can develop.
Has anything surprised you about American sports culture and fandom now that you've kind of had your firsthand experience being a coach and seeing the fan bases and being in a town like DC that has a pretty intense sports fandom? What surprised you about that culture?
Yeah, I would say they always want more. Sometimes we train and I say, okay, what a training we did today. And some players, they want to stay and make an extra. They always want more. I try to explain that sometimes if you train a lot of hours, that doesn't mean that you are going to be better. You have to manage a little bit that. But in terms of desire to compete and be better and train, we focus on that and go. We win, but okay, we can do it better. It's a big surprise for me. And the second thing, being honest, I like to have the possession phase. I like to manipulate the opponent in possession, but here they like a lot run. So for me, it's, as a coach, it's been challenging a lot in the way that I want to put my print, you say that, right? Yeah. But at the same time, I want to win. So how are the players performing? What can I do as a coach to give them tools to be the better possible player? So in terms of physical condition, they are monsters. And as a coach, for me, it's a big new because I can adapt. I like to exploit the characteristics of the player that they have, but at the same time, try to improve them. And they are open-minded. That was the second surprise for me. When you want to improve in something specific about possession and out of possession, I always like to speak the same language in possession and out of possession. So they are open-minded, so I'm very happy with the decision that I took before coming here.
I think that this kind of speaks to this interesting thing that's happening as sports gets more global, is that we're going to see these intersections of culture kind of clash together in multiple ways, whether it's fandom, culture on the pitch, or in a clubhouse locker room. I'm curious for Lindsay and Travis, how these kind of growing dynamics, we've seen globalization explode across other industries over the course of the last, I would say, 20 years especially. But that dynamic is only now coming to sports over the course of the last few years, and is going to happen over the course of the next decade plus, especially as these global sporting events come in. There's so many interesting cultural differences that emerge as a result of that. And so I'm curious, from your vantage point, what you see as the frontier of this specific kind of culture clashes as American leagues are trying to go more global and sports becomes kind of more overtly a place where politics could get sorted out in the future.
Well, I can definitely speak to the side on the what happens culturally with this mixing. I think the political side of it is a slightly different prong of the question. But and my apologies to our illustrious Spanish host, because I focus a lot on the French and U.S. Side. So I will give you an example from that. We can see the manifestation of generations of informal sports diplomacy exchange. We saw that on the Olympic basketball courts this summer with the historic matchup of teams France versus teams United States in both the men's and the women's final matches. That France qualified for both sides is a testament to the generations of men and women who have traversed the Atlantic since the 1950s, bringing with them, initially from the United States to France, the kind of cultural proclivities of basketball in the United States, some of the tactics and the techniques, Bill Russell-style defense, also some of the knowledge, the how-tos in and around the game. And since, for now several decades, it has been waves of French who have come to the United States and learned their craft there, but also brought certain aspects of the European game over as well. And so when we look at, what kinds of legacies these kinds of, player-to-player exchanges can have, we can see that at the formal or elite level through, the basketball example. It's an example of how this can trickle up. The political side is a slightly different corner of that question, and I don't know if, Travis, you want to tackle that or...
Well, I think, from an NBA perspective, for example, the last 6 MVPs have been international. So you have Antetokounmpo, Jokic, Embiid. And so what you're seeing is it's I think, ultimately, it's pushing the United States to we've exported the game, and now other countries they're coming back to us. And you saw, we had some of the greatest modern NBA players in Curry and LeBron James and Durant in the Olympic team, and Serbia took them down to the wire, right, in that game. France as well. And, the future of the NBA appears to continue to be international. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the early favorite for the MVP, is Canadian. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama, going back to France, is French. And so I think, we go to baseball, it's Shohei Ohtani. And, to your question about, what the impact of that is, if you can go 50-50 or 53-58, wherever Ohtani ended up on the season, that's talent, that's ability. So that's going to speak regardless of where you're from. To the political piece, yeah, I agree. That's a slightly different conversation, and there's the influence of the international. I don't think we've necessarily seen that yet. It's more been the U.S. piece of exporting kind of our values and ideals through sports, and that's more done at the NGO and State Department level as opposed to the professional sports level.
One thing I just wanted to tag in, because Travis mentioned the example of the NBA, and I think it's a good example. MLB, we have this as well with the Japanese and Korean players as well, is that when you start to have these very dynamic international player bases, and where it's not just seen as a purely American export, because the French, for example, now have skin in the game in helping to craft a modern NBA with Wembanyama and other players. It helps to diffuse accusations of cultural imperialism, which I know many here in the audience might not immediately think of, but when you're having these conversations overseas in Europe or in other parts of the world, they are kind of prime of place. So I think it's important to keep in mind that sports diplomacy and everything that comes through it, from brands and values and all of that, it's a two-way exchange, right? It's not a one-way broadcast, it's a two-way exchange, and positioning yourself in that way.
I guess building off of the idea of cultural imperialism, especially in the context of sports, I'm curious from what you know about sports and its role in global history, what are the things that people need to be cognizant of as these kinds of sensitive topics kind of emerge? As I feel like, as we've seen on the panels today, there's much more international money coming into American sports and a lot of ambition on the American side to grow these leagues internationally. What are the things that people generally need to be cognizant of as they try to navigate these unprecedented business and political dynamics?
I think first and foremost, understand the context of your interlocutors. So, that other countries have very long established indigenous basketball, football, soccer, baseball cultures, just as 3 examples that we've been talking about. And while they're very keen to learn about the U.S. side of it, they're also proud of their own heritage within it, particularly those who are contributing to the growth of professional U.S. leagues at a kind of this global scale. So I think that's really one of the starting parts. And how do you do that? You ask questions a lot. People love engaging in conversations, and I think that is one of the primary things. And also, when you start to engage in those questions, some of those questions are also, well, how do they do these types of business deals where you're from? To learn how that's done within that local setting, which are oftentimes quite different from how they are here in the United States. The investment club structures, youth development structures are typically quite different than what we're used to here in the United States. And so I think it's important to understand that, ask a lot of questions, seek the information, so that you go in as informed and willing to learn and to devise local solutions that meet your needs as well as those of the people you're engaging with.
Jonatan, I'm curious from your vantage point, has anything surprised you about American sports culture outside of the clubhouse, just like the culture and how fans interact with sports, the media culture around it, the social media dynamic? Like, has anything surprised you about what it's been like to be in America and see how big a role sports plays in our day-to-day lives?
I would say yes, especially before the game. Everything what from here they are creating around the game to create the best possible show. That is a big surprise for me. As a coach, my only attention is about, okay, what do we have to do today? Which is the game plan? Which is my speech to the players? Can I anticipate something about the game? But what is happening before the game, during the game, after the game is much better than what I can see. I like a lot the relation between supporters, for example, and coaches and players and staff. So you need to do something to provoke that they have to come to the stadium every single week. I like to say to the players that when we are playing soccer, football, I don't know what I have to say, soccer or football. I always like to say to the players, we have to give them reasons, because there are other people working to spend time with family. Being honest, in Spain, everything you live, like UEFA Champions final every single game, and here people are enjoying about what they are seeing every single game. And from our side, as a coach, what I like is try to give them reasons. If we play good soccer, they are gonna be back the next week. So what we have to do every single week during trainings to improve our level and give them reasons again to be back to the stadium with the family. And in the business side, they will do their job to provoke or ask the people be together. Because the last thing about your question is when you can share emotions, when you are competing, when you are scoring goals, when you are creating chances, when you are winning games, when you are arising trophies, that is, if you win alone, you cannot share that. It's not the same thing. When you can share that with the supporters, that is crazy.
I think it's interesting too because America, before I would say the last 15 years, had a reputation of kind of not enjoying soccer at all. It was kind of, I feel like, a part of almost the American ethos to some degree that people did not enjoy soccer. And that's really changed, obviously, over the course of the last decade. The FIFA World Cup had the highest ratings in American history the last go-around. And so as someone who was a part of the most intense version of the, has the biggest global scale of soccer in the world in Europe. What has surprised you about American soccer culture and how people have really grown to love soccer in a way that you obviously see on a first-hand basis now on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, good question. I think, for example, playoff is to provoke something in the people. When you win the Shield Cup, you are the best team. In Europe, you are the best team if you win the league. But here, we don't care the league. Here, if you win the NWSL, joking, but if you win the NWSL, you are the best team. I have my doubts about it because if during the regular season you are the best, you are showing that Orlando right now, for example, they didn't lose any game. They are the best team now, but it was a big surprise for me in terms of culture. Okay, how can we connect the people until the end, until the last game? It doesn't matter if you qualified as 8th, you can win the championship. So I think supporters will be around the team giving support until the last game because you are going to have chances until the last day to get success. And for me, look, I am lucky, first of all, to be here in Washington and coaching this team. I was lucky in my past, coaching Barça. For me, the best club in the world. Everything what we did in the last seasons, especially because we got important things in terms of numbers. When I started in 2019 being assistant coach, I remember I was playing in front of 200-300 persons. And we broke the record Guinness assistance to the stadium with more than 92,000 persons in Spotify Camp Nou twice. People said, you can do it, you can do it. I remember that people said after the first game against Real Madrid was a quarterfinal. We won that game, and people said, okay, they are going to the stadium because you are playing against Real Madrid. But after 2 weeks, we repeat and we improve that numbers because we play against other teams, Wolfsburgo. Maybe they are not so known around the world, but people repeat that. Why? Because they like it. Everything what we did into the pitch gave reasons to the supporters to be back after 2 weeks. For me, in terms of growth, if you analyze the big perspective around soccer, now players are athletes. When they go to the stadium, they are seeing shows.
Yeah. At the end of the day, none of this matters unless the product on the pitch, on the field, anywhere is entertaining to people and people connect with that in the community. We're going to turn to Q&A now. So if you have a question.
Hi, my name's Reggie Love. I had a question about men and women's soccer here in the U.S. If you looked at the women's national team this cycle, I think you had like 4 or 5 girls that opted out of college, did not play in college, and basically either went to Europe or went directly to the league. For years, the argument as to why men's soccer has underperformed has been because of sort of the lack of training and the lack of coaching in soccer. So if the women are doing it without going to college, what do the men lack? What's the challenge for men's soccer here in the U.S.?
For me, the question, right? Okay. I can prepare. I can 1v1. Look, I would say, being honest, I don't like to compare for sure, but in Spain, for example, when you are young, when you start playing football, okay, you are gonna be a better player, right, in the future. Why? Because you are spending a lot of hours doing something specific. College or start so late to play soccer. What I feel now, for example, with my players, I can speak about my experience. We have lack of something in different things because they have not the environment to carry out all the build up, all right, or building in terms of, okay, football is a very specific sport. It's high demanding intensities during 90 minutes. One example, how do we have to decelerate to defend a 1v1 situation? I was seeing problems to do that. Physically, they are amazing, but they have not background on that. Weak points on that. Can we do something when they are young to improve on that? I think no. Right now, with the system that we are working here, or you are working here, I am from there. But at the same time, I think it's our responsibility as a coaches, try to give them it's just not about the tactical plan. It's about how do you have to develop your skills to have a good deceleration before 1v1. Why? Because that is gonna decrease the risk of injury. That is gonna improve your defensive movement. You're gonna have more options to play if you are doing that well. So it's because of that when I arrived here with my idea, with my mentality to train in the same way that I was coaching in Barca, I had to modify a lot of things. Why? Because they are different. They are not better, they are not worse, they are different. So as a coach, I need to adapt. I need to coach the staff too, to let them know what do you have to improve, especially for me in terms of the base of athlete to be the best possible athlete. And the last consideration about your question is just not only questions or explain what happened into the pitch, into the training. It's about after the training. High performance environment means for me a lot. Are you recovering? Are you eating? Are you drinking? Are you sleeping hours that you need? Is teach them to survive or to perform in the whole areas. I think it's because of my background, what I believe a lot. I always say the same thing to the staff. We have to be the best into the pitch, but out of the pitch, because we are training just 2-3 hours every day. So we have to teach them to let them know that after the game we have to stay with the supporters there, signing or taking pictures. We have to go to sleep 9-10 p.m. to be ready for the next game. We have to do cold water to be fresh the next training. So for me, it's just not about. Sorry, I am speaking too much. It's just not about the development as an athlete. It's also about the culture in high performance.
Any other questions?
Hello. Thank you all for joining today. I'm Rodrigo Moreski. I work actually just down the road at Meridian International Center. My question would be for all the panelists, and I'd like, if you will, to put on your crystal ball and maybe make a prediction here. In the next 5 to 10 years, which of the typical U.S. sports, right, are hockey, baseball, basketball, and American football, do you think will grow the most internationally? And then as a maybe sort of secondary question, do you think that soccer in that same period of time will kind of displace those 5 traditional American sports to become the biggest, let's say, domestic sport here in the United States, especially with the World Cup in 2026?
So in terms of the sport, it's a really good question. Like, which American sport will do the best in terms of international expansion? You know, the NBA has been doing this, as mentioned, for decades now. I think it's really interesting what the NFL's doing. You know, they certainly have the resources and to push the game abroad, and they're not telling people they need to play tackle football. I mean, that's it's resource intensive, it is equipment intensive, and so that's a little bit more difficult to export. But their model is to play flag football, which is pretty accessible for people and not dissimilar from soccer, right? Fundamentally, in terms of running on a pitch, and so it's something that kids are accustomed to, and then through that create fans for the future for the NFL. So I think, you know, it remains to be seen. They're certainly onto something, and having flag football in the Olympics is certainly going to be helpful in pushing that more into a global environment, because teams are going to want to compete in that. I would assume that basketball continues the trajectory it's on, and will continue to grow. And you know, the advantage that like the NBA has is that there's similar to soccer, is that there's a global federation. There's FIBA for basketball, there's FIFA for football, and so, you know, there's federations in all these countries around the world that are working on the grassroots level to develop the sport, to get young people into the sport. And so you know, that's going to take some time, because if it's just the NFL and every time they talk about it outside the country they have to say no, American football, you know, that's going to be difficult to make that transition. So it'll be interesting to be seen. To the other part of your question about soccer, do I think it's going to supplant other kind of homegrown domestic sports leagues, if you will? I don't think that's probably the case, but it's a perfect time for the World Cup to be here, in not just the success of the MLS over the last 30 years, but also, as Joon was saying early on, you know, soccer it was seen as a European sport or a foreign sport. It's much more seen as a domestic sport, because you have now 2 generations of young people who have been on soccer pitches around the country in youth sports. And obviously youth soccer, anybody here that has kids, you know, you're spending 3 nights a week in the bleachers, right?
Soccer moms.
Traveling teams. That's very much a part of our culture now. And so young people who started playing in the early 2000s or late 90s are now parents, and they're consumers. And so I could see, you know, I think that very much plays in FIFA's favor in terms of interest, fandom, and so the space is just very noisy right now. I mean, you think of MLS, USL, NWSL, now the Super League, you know, a number of, we have had several of those leagues represented today, but I don't know if there needs to be some consolidation. And then the other piece, I think, is college sports, right? College football, college basketball is king in this country. College soccer is not. So, you know, is that going to be a transition where more people start paying attention to the collegiate soccer level and what happens there? Because that's certainly, the NBA and NFL have benefited for decades as a result of the interest at the collegiate level, because it starts much younger.
If I could just, I agree with most of what Travis said. I'd like to just add in a few other things for your consideration and understanding kind of how this goes about at the global level, and when we bring the sports diplomacy element into it. The NBA and the WNBA are going to be the ones that continue to have the most growth overseas of the US leagues, because everyone plays basketball around the world. It's part of their now localized culture. And so by following the league, by following some of the different players, by supporting different teams, they're tapping into an elite version of something that they're already familiar with, right? So again, it comes back to that, you know, tap dancing around the cultural imperialism thing. It's no longer quite in that, right? Everyone's got some skin in the game. Soccer, I think it won't ever surpass the number 1, number 2, number 3 US pro leagues or sports here, but I think it's on the precipice of significant growth because not just the generations now that have been accustomed to playing at the youth levels, but also the younger demographics who are coming up. These are also the generation that's been watching Netflix series in translation, right? So they're part of a very interconnected global Gen Z and so forth, and those who are coming up behind them. So it's kind of natural for them to tap into something that other counterparts are doing elsewhere. And so I do see that that's part of this growing global citizen issue. So I do have very high hopes for the local soccer game here in the U.S., particularly when you then bring in the women's game inside.
I just wanted to add one more thing to that. You mentioned the Netflix thing. I think one of the critical things that's happening at the current moment with all the leagues is that they're turning into entertainment and media companies. And that's the center of where things are shifting, especially as the internet makes a lot of these old corporate giants like NBC, CBS, ESPN, Disney, less relevant in a global landscape where people aren't necessarily going to cable television or newspapers in the way that we did 20, 30 years ago.
And so this is an example that all of my students semester over the past 2-3 semesters keep bringing up. They have fallen in love with F1 thanks to Drive to Survive. They knew nothing about motorsports. They had no interest in it until the series came out, and they have fallen in love with the storytelling, how it brings them literally into with the pilots into the cockpit, and as a result, it is one of the most popular leagues right now with my global sports students in New York, regardless of whether they're undergraduates or graduates. And they're not the only ones. So to the power of this kind of melding.
Yeah, I mean, I say as a 29-year-old who used to work for ESPN, and even when I was at ESPN, never really watched cable television. Like, I think that one of the biggest underplays here is the power of YouTube and influencers and shaping this next media paradigm where people are global stars on YouTube, even if you might not recognize them when you walk down the street. I had an experience recently where my cousin was asking me, who lives in Korea, doesn't speak any English, do you know who Mr. Beast is? And I think that kind of explains kind of the global shift that's happening that I think sports is really going to have to undertake over the course of the next decade as there's more global ambitions for the entire industry. Thank you to our entire panel for this, and if you guys have any questions, we'll all be around to chat. And I think that's the last panel of the day, so I'll hand it back to Devin.